Hi, I'm Mick Davie, your iFit guide, and today we are going on a journey back in time to visit the home of some of the first human inhabitants on the face of the earth. That should get your mind going, so it's time to get your body going too. Go ahead and start getting warmed up on your machine. In this episode, we're in the Matopos National Park, a 1,200 square mile range of rocks, caves, valleys, and bushveld in the Ndebele province of Zimbabwe, in the far south of the country. Now, I'm walking along this rocky track under and around these giant granite boulders to get to a viewing point from which I'm going to set a scene and start a story. For while the astonishing geography and geology of this area is incredibly fascinating, the history of the region is even more so. Indeed, it's no exaggeration to say that the people who have lived in these rocky hills, hidden here, fought wars and waged revolutions here, and who are buried in its caves, have defined the character, history, and politics of Zimbabwe, and in some ways the African continent, for 200 years. So here we are. We're at the base of this lovely granite outcrop, and we're going to start heading up. Keep up with me. This is going to be a great way to get a little burn on. You're going to feel it in your calves. You're going to feel it in your glutes. It's going to be a lovely walk today. I used to come here as a child with my father and grandfather, and they would tell me all sorts of entrancing stories about the history and the violence that took place in this region. And we'll get into some of that very soon. So here we go. This is a very, very steep slope. I'm sorry to be doing this to you so early in the workout, but it's a good way to get warmed up, really warmed up. I'll try to take a little of the edge off by telling you about this incredible area. Now, if we look around this unbelievable landscape, the rocks we see are enormous, smooth whalebacks, or dwalas, as they're known around here. And some are piled on top of each other, forming these almost impossible-looking balancing structures. They almost look like surrealist sculptures. So how did it get like this? Well, about 2 billion years ago, a giant slab of granite, 35 miles wide, 25 miles long, was formed in the belly of the earth. And over millions of years, the ground around it eroded down and revealed this rock slab. The area would have looked a little bit like Uluru in Central Australia today, one massive domed rock rising out of these vast African plains. Over the succeeding millions of years, through rivers and wind and rain, broke down this giant rock and left us with the scattered smaller rocks and outcrops we see today. Now, these smooth giant boulders were honed into oval and egg shapes, forming enormous caves and tunnels and valleys within them, and creating what we call koppies, or rock outcrops, and those surreal balancing rock formations. Now, the name Matopos is believed to have originated from an early Shona word, matombe, which means the rocks, or matobo, meaning bald heads. And you can see why. According to legend, the name was given to this area by King Mzilikazi, a great leader and warrior who we'll learn more about very soon. As soon as we get to the top of this hill, in fact, I don't know about you, but my legs are really burning and I'm kind of out of breath. But stay with me. The view from the top is spectacular and a good reward for a hard early workout. Let's keep going. If your machine is anything like this landscape, it's kicked right up at about 45 degrees at the moment. Great way to start the day. Take a sip of water, stay hydrated. It's quite a long and sweaty walk we've got today. So here we are, up and up, almost at the top. And up here, there is just this magnificent view. Absolutely gorgeous view up here. And this is one of my favorite perspectives, looking out north towards Bulawayo, where I was born. We're pretty much in the middle of Matopos National Park, on the roof of a giant cave formation called Nswatugi. Now let's get our bearings and set the scene for our story. 300 miles to the northwest of us, over there, is Victoria Falls and the Zambezi, where we started this series. Now, to the north of us, about 20 miles in that direction, is the city of Bulawayo. It's Zimbabwe's second largest city and capital of the Ndebele or Matopos people of Zimbabwe. Now, those two names can be interchanged, but for our purposes, we're going to refer to this area as Matopos land and the people and their language as the Ndebele. Let's continue heading back over this way, and then I'm going to show you something really special. Because the story of the Matopos is as much about what happened here as how it came to look like this. For these rocks and hills are hallowed ground, a place of astonishing history, spirituality, folklore, and tradition. They are venerated as the dwelling place of the spirits of departed Ndebele kings. And they are also the burial place of a white man named Cecil John Rhodes, the British Empire builder who started the colonization of South Africa and Rhodesia in the 1880s. Rhodes was buried as a king here in 1902 by the same Ndebele people whose land he took and whose men he fought. And we're going to visit Rhodes' grave over in that direction a little later. We'll also see the grave of an Ndebele king, the powerful chief and military genius Mzilikazi, the first ruler of the Ndebele people. We'll just pause here to catch our breath, because I want to explain that long before the Ndebele made this their area, their homeland, and long before Rhodes engaged with them here, the first human inhabitants were the Stone and Iron Age people, the San Bushmen. And we can trace their presence here back as far as 200,000 years ago. And that makes Matopos one of the oldest areas of constant human habitation on Earth. Come, I want to show you one of their art galleries. All right, so how are you feeling? How are those legs? Hope they're feeling good and strong, because we've got another little hill up here. Your machine's going to kick up in just a moment. We're going to get those calves burning again. Now, the San Bushmen are the nomadic people, hunter-gatherers, who would move with the changing seasons and animal migrations, much like certain Native American tribes and the indigenous people in Australia, the Aboriginals. They hunted in similar ways with bows and arrows and poisoned darts, and they were incredibly adept at bushcraft. So you can still see this way of life in Botswana to the west of us, which has the largest population of San Bushmen still living in southern Africa, mostly in the Kalahari Desert. And it was their ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, the early San, who recorded their history, their stories, their culture, not in writing, not in books, but in paintings. And if you just push on with me up here, we're going to see some absolutely remarkable sand bushman rock art. Come and have a look at this. Welcome to Nswatugi Cave. Nswatugi means the place of jumping because the indigenous people believed that God jumped from his home at Ndebele mountain, landing on this hill before jumping to another hill nearby. See the paintings here, let's have a look. In such incredible detail. We see giraffe, elephant, kudu, herds of antelope, and also humans in a variety of colors. Up here we have two large polychrome giraffes, below which is a camp scene of sleeping figures up in there. And below that are 6 large kudu antelope and a mass of figures, including a zebra, crouched humans, and others carrying weapons, and a line of running hunters, so obviously a hunting scene. Now, these paintings are thought to be around 4,000 to 6,000 years old, but there are painted slabs from this area dating back at least 30,000 years that are now in museums. If you think about that, it's extraordinary that they've survived, and amazing to think that human beings have been expressing themselves so beautifully for so long. All right. Now, while the paintings and the etchings are done with real artistic ability, experts believe their purpose was not artistic, but rather shamanic and ceremonial. And on top of that, they were also markers of specific geography, physical places of power, spirit, and energy. Now, whatever the meaning of the paintings and the etchings, their geographic locations are primary, while the artistry is secondary. Let's head on down this way. Now look at this. You can understand why those early sand bushmen made their homes here. It's full of animals to hunt. Those same animals depicted in those ancient paintings. Not much has really changed here, has it? The sand bushmen would shelter up in the caves up there and hunt down here on the plains below. Now, let's jump forward many thousands of years to the 19th century, and a different group of people would find their way to these rocks and hills looking for shelter as well. Remember, I mentioned the Zulus from South Africa. Well, 200 years ago, in the southern part of South Africa, there lived a great Zulu king named Shaka Zulu. Now, the Zulus had always been a warrior people, but under Shaka, they became a brutal military force. Starting around 1815, they began conquering territory and tribes in South Africa and accumulating enormous wealth and power. Shaka has been described by military historians as Africa's Napoleon. He invented new weapons of war and new military techniques. Shaka's main tactic, however, was terror. No mercy to any perceived enemies. In the 1820s, a young lieutenant of Shaka's named Mzilikazi was staging raids and wars in the northern parts of the Zulu kingdom. And the story goes that he got into the habit of keeping some of the plundered cattle for himself. Shaka found out about it, which meant certain execution. Rather than waiting around to be put to death, Mzilikazi broke away, headed up north, all the while being pursued by Shaka's assassins. Now, constant war was taking its toll, and there is a famous story that in the early 1830s, Mzilikazi had become friends with a British missionary named Robert Moffat. And the story goes that Moffat told him, "Your people are being destroyed. You need to cross the Crocodile River, the Limpopo, and go to the land of the flat-topped hills. You'll be safe there." The flat-topped hills was this region, Bulawayo and the Matopos Hills. How are you all feeling? I hope your legs are feeling strong and you're enjoying this workout. Let's keep going, there's lots more to see. Now, rather than come directly into this area himself, in 1836, Mzilikazi sent a large group, an advanced group, to the flat-topped hills here, including his brothers, sons, wives, and all of their children. And they settled just north of here. It took them 2 years to get here from South Africa. And in the meantime, Mzilikazi was carrying out raids and wandering through Botswana and towards the Zambezi Valley. There was no way to communicate with him. And a year after arriving, the advanced group had not seen Mzilikazi in 3 years. Naturally, they thought that he was dead. And they soon hailed his son, Nkulumani, as his successor. But in fact, Mzilikazi was not dead. It turned out he was only a week's journey away near Victoria Falls. On Mzilikazi's surprise return, after 3 years in the wilderness, a celebration was held at Ntamazinduna, a mountain to the north of here. The year was 1840, and the celebration turned into a scene from Game of Thrones. Mzilikazi had everyone who had anointed his son Nkulumani as king executed, including his own relatives. It is said that he had all their joints smashed with clubs and they were thrown down a steep-sided hill and left to be eaten by hyenas, their spirits doomed to wander the earth forever. So keep going, you're doing really, really well. And we'll pick up the pace just a little bit because we're on a nice flat road. So in 1840, this region became known as Ndebele land and was the first kingdom of the Ndebele people, and Bulawayo was named as its capital. 23 years later, Mzilikazi established another encampment in the northeast part of the Matopos Hills. It was called Mlahandlela. These are those exact hills just up here in front of us, and the villagers that live around here are likely his direct descendants. These rocky hills were a perfect place of refuge, a place to defend yourself in case of war. Let's head up this way. I'm about to take you to see something very special, a place that very few people get to see. We are extraordinarily lucky to be able to be here today. This is not a place people are normally allowed to come to, but we've been given special permission to be here by a very, very special person indeed. And here he is, Prince Leo Zulu Kandaba. Sawubona Kunjani. It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much for allowing us to come to this sacred place today.
Thank you very much. You are most welcome.
Thank you.
As long as you come with good intentions.
We are here with good intentions. We want to share the story of your ancestor. Prince Leo is the grandson of King Mzilikazi's last-born child, and he is the official guardian of this spiritual place. May I approach? Can I?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're all welcome.
So behind this metal gate is where King Mzilikazi was laid to rest. His entourage tied 12 ropes together and lowered his body into a cave very, very deep underground here, and then sealed up the entranceway to protect it from being looted by bandits and thieves and witch doctors who were interested in coming and pilfering sacred objects from the king's burial site. Let's keep going. Your machine is going to be kicking up very shortly. We're going to get another burn on in our legs. So after Mzilikazi died, he was succeeded as king not by his son Nkulumani, who had survived the massacre at the Hill of the Chiefs, but by another son, Lobengula. Lobengula was a big, powerful, soft-spoken man. Wait until you hear about him. But first, just let me give you a little warning about the steep hill ahead. You're going to feel your machine really start to incline in a minute, and we'll get our burn on as we head into the last chapter or two of our story. So Lobengula became famous because he had an interaction with a man named Cecil John Rhodes, who was a British imperialist and very, very cunning businessman down in South Africa. Rhodes had seen the potential of exploiting all of the riches up here in Ndebele land. And through an emissary named Rhodes, he convinced Lobengula to sign a document which changed the face of this country and quite possibly the face of Africa for the next century. It was called the Rhodes Concession, and it was a document that gave Cecil John Rhodes and the British South Africa Company permission to exploit all of the mineral rights underneath Lobengula's territory. Now, if Lobengula thought that that document would protect his land by instituting some controls over Cecil John Rhodes, he was much mistaken. There followed this huge flood of white prospectors and fortune hunters who came up here to exploit the riches in the soil of Ndebele land. After years of being badgered by white prospectors for more and more, Lobengula finally left this area and shortly after died. Nobody knows where he died or how. And after Lobengula's death, the Ndebele people in Bulawayo rose up against the whites. And that was what became known as the Ndebele Rebellion. The fighting was fierce and it took place in these very hills. And when I came here as a boy, my father and grandfather would describe so vividly the battles that took place up here. I could almost hear the sound of the Martini Henry rifles blasting away from these hills. Over 100 white settlers were killed and hundreds more Ndebele lost their lives. Finally, a dapper white man in a suit and hat rode out on horseback, unarmed, into the heart of the Ndebele encampment. 3,000 seething warriors armed with spears and axes and tall shields awaited him. The man told them he was there to talk peace, and that man was Cecil John Rhodes himself. And the fact that he was unarmed and had come right into their encampment earned him the respect of the Ndebele people, and the rebellion ended soon afterwards. The Ndebele gave Rhodes a special name. They called him Mlamlula Nkunutsi, the one who stood between two fighting bulls. In other words, the man who brought peace. And if we go up here, we're going to see the place where Rhodes was finally laid to rest. Before we do, let's just take a quick look back at this magnificent landscape. It's really hard to believe that this was at one point a battleground and the blood ran thick on these stones. It's such a gorgeous and peaceful place today. So we're climbing up to the final resting place of Cecil John Rhodes, for it was on that same visit to talk peace with the Ndebele that Rhodes, riding his horse into these hills and climbing these same bold rocks, found the site where he wanted to be buried. And we'll see that shortly. But first, let me close the circle on my own story as we climb. I've just told you about the first Chimurenga, the first uprising against whites. Well, 70 years later, the second Chimurenga began, an even bloodier uprising by black liberation fighters against white minority Rhodesian rule. That war lasted about 15 years, from around 1965 to independence in 1980, and it cost tens of thousands of lives. I was a small boy in Bulawayo when that war was raging, but my father was a military doctor in the Rhodesian army, and my mother was a nurse, and they both served on the front lines. The war and the policies of the white Rhodesian government did not sit well with either of them. And so it was that in 1978, with just $800 to their name, my parents left Rhodesia for Australia, saying goodbye to their country of birth and dragging me and my little brother along with them. I was 4 years old. I grew up in Australia, but I've always had Africa and Zimbabwe in my blood. It's something that never leaves. I love it here. I feel at home here. Indeed, in my early 20s, after college, I hitchhiked 9,000 miles from the bottom of Africa to the top, filming and reporting my journey as I went. I sold that story to an Australian broadcast network, and later National Geographic bought those films, and those films helped kickstart my career as a director, conflict reporter, and a writer. And I called the series Cape to Cairo, the same name that Rhodes gave to his vision of a railway line to connect the ends of Africa. Let's slow down just a little bit. I'm getting out of breath, and I'm sure you are too, and you can start warming down. Now, that railway line never came to be, as it happens. But by 1900, the turn of the 20th century, there was a railway line linking Cape Town to Bulawayo, and even one linking Bulawayo to the Matopos out here. And just as well, because it would come in handy for Rhodes to be granted his final wish. Rhodes died on March 26, 1902, in Wiesenberg, Cape Town. And Rhodes's body was taken by train from Cape Town to Bulawayo. His company hired 1,000 Ndebele laborers to build a road into the heart of Matopos, and his body was carried up here on a gun carriage to what Rhodes had called World's View. Now, there are incredible photographs of the funeral. 3,000 people are present. 2,000 of them are Ndebele, many of them chiefs, and another 1,000 white people. The Ndebele asked that the firing party not discharge their rifles so as not to disturb the spirits. Rhodes's body was lowered into the grave in silence. And then, for the first and probably the only time, the Ndebele gave a white man the rousing Matopos royal salute. Bayete. Rhodes was buried right here as a king in a rock in Africa. And this is where he lies. An incredibly controversial character, a man who shaped Africa, and lies here at the top of the Matopos National Park. You've done so well today. You've earned yourselves a really good break. Now, we've learned some of the history of this incredible region, but to really know this place, you have to feel it in your heart. And the best way to do that is through music. So come and meet the band. These guys are called Drums of Peace, and they're from my hometown, Bulawayo. But unlike me, they can hold the tune and keep the beat. I'm Mick Davie, your iFit guide, and I can't wait to take you on another walk through this magical country.